Okay, in this video we are going to be looking at the fundamentals of statistics and just get an introduction to the idea of statistics. We will not get deep into calculations or anything like that in this unit or in this chapter. So a lot of what you'll see today is definitions, and so you'll need to kind of bear with me as we go through and we just establish some boundaries, some definitions, some parameters as we begin talking about statistics. Okay, but statistics is a huge field and plays a significant role in our society today. There's numbers all over the place, and it's pretty hard pressed to find a topic that doesn't link in some way to statistics or doesn't have some kind of statistics in there. A couple of examples that we throw in here. You'll see, opinion polls. You'll see surveys, businesses, market research, sporting statistics. These are just kind of daily things that we hear about all the time. And so statistics is a very valuable field of study to understand because it can be manipulated easily as well. So, what is a statistic, or what are statistics? Now, there's a couple of definitions here. When you use the singular definition, statistics is the science of collecting, organizing, and interpreting data. So when you're just talking about kind of statistics in a singular form, it's just that science of collecting, organizing, and interpreting data. However, statistics are also, if we talk about it in a plural sense, they're also the data, the numbers or other pieces of information that describe or summarize something. Up here, if we talk about, there are 30 students in a class that range from 17 to 64. Those numbers, 30 students, 17 years, 64 years, those are statistics that describe the class. So that would be in a plural sense. And so, again, it can be talked about in a singular sense or in a plural sense. And usually it'll be given away based off of the context of what you're talking about. Now, in statistics, we do a lot of studies and surveys and things of that nature. And so we need to define a couple of things here. First, the population. Okay, the population is, in a statistical study, is the complete set of people or things that are being studied. So if you're talking about the world population, then your population is the world. If you're talking about people living in America, your population is America. If you're talking about people living in Europe, then Europe is your population. If you're talking about the number of vehicles, then you're looking at all possible vehicles ever made. If you're looking at just a specific sport such as the NBA, then your population is the NBA teams. So the population is the complete set, and it's very dependent upon what you're trying to study. Now, the sample, when you hear sample, that is a subset of the population from which the raw data are actually being obtained. So if we're talking about the number of Americans in a study, okay, the sample is going to be just a portion of people within America. So one person kind of demonstrate it to me like this. So if this whole thing is your population, then you could have a sample. You could take a sample and you're just getting a little piece of the puzzle. You could have another sample over here. Samples can vary in size. You can even have a couple of samples that might actually overlap and do kind of the same thing, or get some of the same people or same individuals or same materials, or, as I mentioned before, like vehicles, teams, and so forth. So again, the samples are just what we call subsets. They're contained within the population. They don't go outside of those populations. So if we say, our population is people living in Canada, we would not consider samples from America, Europe, Asia, or whatever the case may be like that. You've got to stick within that population. And we'll talk about setting up studies a little bit more here later on. Now, population parameters are specific numbers of interest to researchers that describe certain characteristics of the population. That's kind of what you're looking at. If we're looking at, what percentage of people, sorry, I grew up around cars, so what percentage of people drive a Ford? That would be our parameter. We're looking at people who drive, the percentage of people that drive Fords. Or, if we're looking at the population, how many people, what percentage of people have 3 or more TVs in their home, or what percentage of the population in the United States has internet access at home, and so forth. So that would be the population parameter. When we break it down into the sample, okay, we talk about sample statistics, are numbers describing characteristics of the sample. Okay, those are found by consolidating and summarizing the raw data. And when we say raw data, that's just data that you've collected from the sample. And the reason when we talk about the population and samples is because in a lot of cases it's impossible to be able to go out and say, get every person in the population to fill out a survey or something like that, or to get data on every single person in the population. So what we're going to do is we would take the sample, we would collect a sample, a small group or a subset inside that. The larger the better, but it could be very costly and difficult. But we use that sample then to make predictions or inferences on the population as a whole. So let's look at this first question we have here. For the following study, identify the population, the sample, population parameters, and the sample statistics. Sorry, I'm right here. Okay, question 15. In order to gauge public opinion on the President's plan to contain Iran's nuclear program, the Pew Research Center surveyed 1,001 Americans by telephone. So what's our population? Well, our population, when we look at the sample that was obtained, they only contacted Americans. And so our population here, so the population is going to be all Americans. Because our sample was looking specifically at Americans, so it's a subset of all of the Americans. Okay, and then the sample in this case would be the 1,001 Americans that were surveyed by telephone. So Americans surveyed, and the method they used was by telephone. Okay. Now, what's the parameter? What are we looking at? So the population parameter. Okay, well, the characteristic thing we're looking at is the opinion. The parameter would be the opinion of all Americans on this plan for the President's plan to contain Iran's nuclear program. So that would be the population parameter. Okay, the sample statistic in this case, so let's try sample stat. Okay, the sample statistic is going to be just the opinions. Oops. So the opinions on the plan among those in the survey. So again, the parameter is going to be the opinion of the American population as a whole. The sample statistic is going to be just those that we gathered the data from. Again, we gathered the data in a sample to try and make a prediction on what all Americans would think. So when we're looking at a statistical study, we've got some basic steps here. And I've got a little diagram that will hopefully be helpful for you. So when you're doing this, first you want to state the goals of your study. You want to determine your population and exactly what you would like to learn about. So you want to establish that population, that parameter in the beginning. Okay, next you want to choose, and we're going to talk about, you can see it down below there, a representative sample from the population. Okay, you want to get a nice representation of people who will reflect the characteristics of the population. So if we look down below again here, a representative sample is a sample in which the relevant characteristics of the sample members are generally the same as the population. So if you're trying to look at American people in general, and all you do is poll your neighbors that live directly around you, that is not a good representation, or good a good representative sample of the entire country. So your population, you may need to narrow it down if you were to do something like that. So getting a representative sample, then collecting the raw data. This can take quite a bit of time. I've done this in the past myself. It takes quite a bit of time sometimes to collect the raw data and then summarize these data by finding sample statistics of interest. Then use the sample statistics to infer or to make predictions about the population parameters. Okay, so if you poll people in that prior example that we had, and we were talking about those people's opinions on the president's plan for the the Iran nuclear program. Okay, you're going to take the sample opinions that you got, those sample statistics, and then try and infer based off of those opinions what do we feel like the population is feeling. And then lastly, we draw conclusions, determine what you learn and how it addresses your goals. So it kind of brings us back full circle. So this little chart down here is a good little way to look at it. So you got to identify your population, your goals. Then you go out and you collect a sample and get some sample statistics. So you identify your sample, get some sample statistics, then you make some inferences on the population parameters, and then you bring it back to the population and draw conclusions. So, what does this tell us about what we're trying to study? Okay. Now, when we go out to create this sample right here, this is one key area of statistics is, how do we actually gather our sample? Just want to check and see how much time we have here. So here are 4 common sampling methods, and each of them have strong points. Some of them are more convenient than others, and so our first one is what we call simple random sampling, and this is a very ideal way to do it. To randomize, we choose a sample of items in such a way that every sample of the same size has an equal chance of being selected. So there's no what we call bias. And we're completely randomizing everything, so everyone has an equal opportunity to participate from that population. It's not always the easiest thing to do. A lot of ways it's done is just kind of in a computer. A lot of times, taking phone numbers and then assigning each phone number and having a computer randomly select, and you call and talk to those people. You don't know who's going to be on the other end. So that's what we call simple random sampling. Again, usually the most preferred, but very difficult in a lot of cases to do that. Okay, systematic sampling it's a simple way to choose the sample, and it's done in just the way it says, a very systematic way. So, for example, I got a picture down here, systematic sampling. You would grab, say you were pulling people on the street. Well, you would do something like every 3rd person you would talk to, or I did a study once of trying to determine the number of vehicles or what portion of people drove one type of vehicle versus other type of vehicles, and I went on the busiest road that I could at various times, and every 5th vehicle that passed by, I would mark down what the make was. So this is where we have very systematic. You're just every 5th, every 3rd, or something like that. So that's a systematic sample.